Hi guys, so we finished up the top half of the unit circle, getting all of our special angles from 0 degrees all the way over to 180 degrees. So now we're going to get down to quadrant 3 here, okay? And so remember, everything's based off of quadrant 1, okay? So that first important angle measure has to have a reference angle of 30 degrees. Then the second one would have to have a reference angle of 45 degrees. And the third one would have to have a reference angle of 60 degrees. Okay, so they're very specific, okay, angle measures. Okay, so 210 degrees. Okay, so we know we have, 0 degrees, we have 90 degrees, okay, we have 180 degrees, and we have 270 degrees, and then all the way around obviously it'd be 360. Okay, so that 210 obviously is between the 180 and the 270, and it's down here in quadrant 3, so it would be somewhere about right here. Okay, and so we have this angle measure that starts at 0 degrees and goes all the way around, okay, to 210 degrees. Okay, so we're down in quadrant 3. Okay, so we go to our rules. What do we do in quadrant 3 for our reference angle? We would go theta minus 180. Okay, so that would be the 210 minus 180 would give us our alpha. Okay, so our reference angle, alpha, ends up being 210 degrees minus the 180 degrees. Okay, so our reference angle is 30 degrees. Okay, so this guy in here, okay, has to be 30 degrees. Okay, so I have this right triangle right there, and notice that has to be a reflection of this 30 degree right triangle in quadrant 1. Okay, so that means that this point right there and this point have to be reflections of each other. So if we go here and we say, okay, well, what's going on at this 30 degrees? Well, the coordinates are radical 3 over 2 1/2. Okay, so this guy right here is at radical 3 over 2 1/2. Okay, so these coordinates have to be almost identical to these coordinates because it's just a reflection, except now we're down in quadrant 3. So we know that our x coordinate is negative and our y coordinate is negative. So right here we're going to get negative radical 3 over 2 and negative 1/2. Okay, so we have our next really important angle measure, okay, at 210 degrees, okay, on the unit circle. So this would be 210 degrees, and that gives us negative radical 3 over 2 and a negative 1/2. Okay, so remember, everything's cosine sine, so that means the cosine of 210 is negative radical 3 over 2, and the sine of 210 is negative 1/2. Okay, so far so good. Okay, let's see. All right, 225 degrees. Once again, we've got 180 degrees due west, and we've got 270 degrees due south, so 225 is between them. So that guy is going to be about right here. Okay, so that means we are coming all the way around. Okay, 225 pesos. So I've got to find my reference angle in there. Okay, drop my vertical line to form a right triangle. And what's my reference angle? So again, we're in quadrant 3. So we go to our rules. What do? If we're in quadrant 3, we go theta minus 180. So I'm going to have to go 225 minus 180. Okay, so to get my reference angle. So my alpha, my reference angle is 225 minus 180. Okay, and so that will give us 45 degrees. Okay, so this guy in here is 45 degrees. So that means I have to have a 45, 45, 90. So that has to be the same as the 45, 45, 90 up here, formed by a 45 degree angle. So that point P here and this point down here are reflections of one another. So we say, okay, well, what's going on up here? Okay, so we go back and we say, okay, 45 degrees So the coordinates of that point is radical 2 over 2 and radical 2 over 2. Okay, so this guy is radical 2 over 2 and radical 2 over 2. So if I reflect it from quadrant 1 down to quadrant 3, now my x-coordinate's negative, my y-coordinate's negative. So we're going to get negative radical 2 over 2 and negative radical 2 over 2. Okay, so I have my next part of my unit circle at 225 degrees. Okay, so let's see that next guy right here, 225 degrees. And I get negative radical 2 over 2 and negative radical 2 over 2. So that means cosine sine, so that means cosine of 225 is negative radical 2 over 2, and the sine of 225 is negative radical 2 over 2. Okay. All right, so let's see. Next guy, 240 degrees. Okay, right here. Once again, 180 degrees due west, 270 degrees due south, 240 is in between there. It's going to be about right here. Okay, so once again, I would have this guy coming all the way around at 240 degrees. Okay, so I drop a vertical line up to the x-axis to form my right triangle, and I need that reference angle in here. Okay, so my reference angle, again, going back to this sheet, what do I do in quadrant 3? Theta minus 180. So it's going to be the 240 minus 180 to get my reference angle. So my alpha is 240 degrees minus 180 degrees, and that will give us 60 degrees. So I've got a 60 degree, okay, reference angle there. So that has to correspond with my 60 degree angle in quadrant 1. Okay, so that means that this point, this P, and this point down here have to be reflections of each other. So we say, okay, well, what's going on in quadrant 1 with 60 degrees? So we go back here. At 60 degrees, the coordinates of the point on the unit circle are 1/2 and radical 3 over 2. Okay, so let's see if this guy is 1/2 and radical 3 over 2, and this guy is a reflection of that. Okay, all I have to do is just account from going to quadrant 1 to quadrant 3, where my x-coordinate's negative, my y-coordinate's negative. So this would be a negative 1/2 and a negative radical 3 over 2. Okay, so now we can put our next important angle in there at 240 degrees. Okay, and that would be a negative 1/2 and a negative radical 3 over 2. Okay, so that would mean, again, cosine sine. So the cosine of 240 is negative 1/2, and the sine of 240 is negative radical 3 over 2. Okay, so that takes care of quadrant 3. We already have what's going on at 180. Now we just have to figure out this guy. Okay, so remember, it's 0 degrees, 90 degrees, 180, 270. So this is 270 degrees. And remember, we're on the unit circle, so the radius is 1, so this is 1 down from the origin. So that would be at 0, -1. Okay, once again, cosine sine. So that means the cosine of 270 would be 0, and obviously you could punch that in your calculator. And the sine of 270 would be -1. Okay, so let's see, we've got quadrant 1, quadrant 2, and quadrant 3 done. So tomorrow we'll finish up the unit circle and do quadrant 4. Okay, you guys stay safe out there, and I miss you a whole bunch.